O'Malley was a tough negotiator. He was a good negotiator. And his demands, what he expected from the city, they called that the tablets. Like the tablets, the stone tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments on it, that O'Malley's demands were like the tablets, were like the Ten Commandments. They were non-negotiable demands. They were requirements. And O'Malley argued very well and stuck to his position very well, because he understood that the city wanted the Dodgers very badly. He also understood the fact that they had a big gaping hole in the ground, at least symbolically, that once they had stopped the Elysian Park development for housing, they had to put something there. Now, there already was something there, a little haphazard community, a Chavez Ravine community, which was unfortunately, I say unfortunately because it caused great scandal when the people were removed. It was settled by people who just loved being there. And when they were moved, the Arriga family, etc., became a symbol as they're being carried out of their homes, etc. Now, it turned out later that they owned other homes around the city and were not as impoverished as they might have been expected. But it was a great symbol. But O'Malley knew all this. O'Malley could read the city. O'Malley was a New Yorker. He was raised in a Irish Catholic family that had worked for the city. He himself, as a young man, had worked in urban administration, had written a manual, in fact, on urban administration. He knew how cities worked. He knew city politics. He knew how power is exercised in the city through aligning of groups and aligning them with their self-interest. Politics is art of the possible. So he has to get a lot of credit, whether you agree with him, the conclusion or not. Now, meantime, it's surprising how vocal and with what strength there was the opposition to the giveaway to the Dodgers. In fact, it had to go before the voters to have final approval. And really, it was won by Hollywood. I think it was won by the motion picture stars, to include Ronald Reagan and others who came out for the Dodgers event that really had them win that election finally and get the whole package approved.
Politics.
Well, Boren was an independent-minded reform figure. He'd been a former judge and was not fully under the control of the oligarchy. He had a reform side to him. And in fact, at one point, in one of the hearings about the housing, one of the people in the audience called Boren a communist, and Boren got into almost a fist fight with the fellow, which when you think of Boren as an older man with rimless glasses, pudgy in a double-breasted suit, be the last person in the world you'd think that would be pugnacious and actually hold up his fists, etc. Now, Polson was a different kind of figure. Polson was a Republican Party man. He was an accountant by training. He had a corporate mindset. He had never sat on the bench and had the independence of what a judge had, and was much more smooth corporate spokesperson for the city. And incidentally, did a very good job. Did a very good job in what his goals were. He later wrote an article for Los Angeles Magazine, a very key article, saying when I became mayor, one of the things I wanted to do was to bring a major league team to the city, and I did it. I knew that we had to have a major league team. I'm almost quoting him now, but certainly paraphrasing him very closely. We knew we had to have a major league team to be a major league city. We were very deficient in that. Now, his efforts from that perspective run parallel to Dorothy Buffum Chandler's efforts, saying, well, we need also a first-class music venue in the downtown. Or in later time, Cardinal Mahoney saying we need a major cathedral in the downtown. Or Richard Riordan, Eli Broad saying, and the Walt Disney family saying we need a major performance venue in the downtown. Or, again, lately they're planning for Grand Avenue, which is temporarily on hold. So there's part of that 50-year period, 50-year cycle of downtown development that O'Malley saw and, in effect, Dodger Stadium initiated. Now, if you look at the architecture of Dodger Stadium, it was done in part under the consultantship of naval captain had become, because the stadium was like a ship. And you look at the buildings, the airports that were built in this period, the early '60s, say, at Washington D.C. Dulles Airport, or parts of St. Louis, etc. I'll say that again in case that got in the way.
Perfect.
If you look at Dodger Stadium's architecture, and you compare it to the airports that were built at the same time in Washington, St. Louis, New York, and other places, other cities, it exuded modernity. It exuded large general lines. The Dodger Stadium was proud of the fact there was no obstructions. Every seat had a view. It had a kind of ship-like quality. It's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that great spaceship that comes down. The Dodger Stadium seemed to have alighted on that field. Now that field was created. It was already a knoll there, but they created it through landscaping and filled it out and flattened it with the parking surrounding, the mother of all parking lots surrounding the dropping down of this structure. So it exuded modernism, exuded an era of steel and concrete, clean lines, and generalized solutions. After all, the 1950s, early 60s was in architectural terms reflective of a society that was in love with modernism, efficiency, and general organization. Look at the companies: General Motors, General Mills, General Electric, General Foods, all those general, i.e. generalized experience, long clean lines pointing out for modernity. That's why the battle with Chavez Ravine, I'll say that again.
Okay.
That's why the battle of the Dodgers with Chavez Ravine seemed so dramatic, because it seemed to be against localized Mexican American people living in houses that were simple, almost homemade, as opposed to this great modern corporate entity. But Dodger Stadium is a monument to mid-20th century, a little later to Camelot, to the Kennedy period in architecture. It's reflected also in the great highway system that came and was built by the federal government in the aftermath of the Highway Defense Act passed during the Eisenhower administration. In effect, we're all living in that world today. That period of time created the infrastructure that we're living in today in terms of freeways and major public buildings. And Dodger Stadium played a big role. It's not just a stadium. As important as it is as a stadium, it was a symbol of the collective refashioning of Los Angeles in the post-war period, preparing for what Walter Lippmann called the American century, golden age. And today, now 50, 60 years later, we begin to look back and see the 50s, the 60s, not the 70s, but certainly the 50s and the 60s as a time of extraordinary ascendancy in this notion of the American century. And Los Angeles during this period becomes a formally recognized great American city. It's recognized. By the time Dodger Stadium is dedicated, by the time the Music Center opens atop Nob Hill, I'll say it again, Nob Hill, I mean Bunker Hill. Yeah. By the time Dodger Stadium is dedicated, by the time the Music Center opens atop Bunker Hill, by the time LACMA opens up in its new location at the Wilshire Boulevard, the La Brea Tar Pits, each of these events are covered in the national media, and the stories are almost identical. Here's another instance of Los Angeles coming into its own.